How's your congregation? Everybody's good?
Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad of Delmer, together with my co-host Mark Romer, of Statewide News Service and jbiztechphilly.com.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. It's good to be here again. And guess what? We have the top Jew in the legislature, consummate Jew, the head of the state, the National Association of Jewish Legislators of New York. National
That's right.
Association of Jewish Legislators of New York.
Yes.
Okay.
Top Jew in that sense.
That's right. And then you're also an assembly member, Chuck Lavine, and you are from like what I call the Gold Coast of Long Island.
It's referred to as the Gold Coast.
Right.
It's the north shore of Long Island, the northeastern portion
Glen
of
Cove.
Nassau County.
Yeah.
Yes, my hometown is the little city of Glen Cove.
And so that's a lot of mansions. You have Sagamore Hill in your district.
Well, Sagamore Hill is actually in Mill Neck, and that's about 6 miles away from where I live. That was Theodore Roosevelt's home.
Right, but it's in the district.
It's in my district,
Yeah, okay.
and it is going to reopen. They've done major renovations. It should reopen any day. And if you've
Wouldn't it
never
for
been,
visitors?
if you have
Oh,
never been, it is just a
And Mark,
jewel.
we ought to go there.
I've been there.
Oh, you've been there?
And I
Yes.
will go again if the opportunity arises. I mean, it really is everything you're saying it is. I mean,
No,
it's just
oddly.
amazing because he loved to hunt animals, and all those heads of the animals he shot are on the walls.
So let me tell you a story,
Yeah,
two
sure.
little stories. First, the first time I came to New York, because I am, like Rabbi Simon, a Midwesterner, my father took us to New York in about 1954 or 1955. We had a motor trip I then lived in Wisconsin, not Chicago, but Wisconsin. And we came to New York City, and where did he decide to take us? We didn't do anything in New York City, but he took us to Sagamore Hill, which had just opened as a National Historic Site. So ironically enough, all these years later, I end up representing that neighborhood in the New York State Assembly, and the great joy of being a politician is such that there's no more fun than being able to deliver a speech from the porch of Sagamore Hill, right in the shadow of Theodore Roosevelt. But I have a very interesting story that involves Theodore Roosevelt and the Jews.
Really?
So in my little hometown of Glen Cove, there was for almost 100 years a local department store known as Singer's Department Store, founded in the very early 1900s by Barney Singer, who was a refugee from Eastern Europe. And he would peddle his wares. Actually, he would carry pots and pans on his back and go from little town to little town on the north shore of Long Island. He once went to Sagamore Hill, and he knocked on the door, and who should answer but Theodore Roosevelt? But Singer...
Trying to selling him a pot?
Yes. But
Chicken
Singer,
in every pot.
Singer, who grew up in the era of the pogrom and in the era of such fear of public officials, was frightened and ran away. Roosevelt chases him, and Singer, with all the pots and pans on his back, kneels down almost in obedience to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt says, "In this country, no man stands beneath another. Stand up." So that's a story told to
That's
this
a
day
good story,
in the
sure.
Singer family. It's a great story.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That
Yeah, I
is.
know.
And considering you're a staunch Democrat, and Roosevelt was a staunch Republican, Teddy Roosevelt
Well,
was.
Mark, that's a very interesting point, but I think you know, and for sure the rabbi knows, because the rabbis know everything. Were he alive today, he would be a Democrat. Much the same is true of Abraham Lincoln. So the two great Republicans would today be Democrats. And some people argue that even Ronald Reagan, another great Republican, but
Former
certainly
Democrat.
not on those
He was a
levels,
former
he was a
Democrat.
Democrat, might not be so at home in today's Republican Party, and that's a sad statement.
Yeah, because he did like to bring people together. Reagan did like to.
Yes, he did.
He was less partisan, and he said the Democratic Party left him. He didn't.
We
need
should
the
write a
Democratic
whole
Party.
book because there's a
Pragmatic.
brand new book, Abraham Lincoln and the Jews. So you can
Yeah.
write Theodore Roosevelt with the Jews.
That's
So start
true.
writing a book over here.
That's true. And of course,
Yeah.
Lincoln is the most fascinating of all our political characters
Well,
of all time.
The Jews in Lincoln were just. I mean, you know some of the stories about the Jews in Lincoln? I mean,
This new book is a fascinating chapter in American history,
'cause
and it is.
covered some of that on the show here, but also going to the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia.
Yes.
They have a lot of those stories, but there was a famous one that's local for Albany, is that there was a Rabbi, Isaac Mayer Wise, who started the Fourth Reformed Congregation in the United States. He was a rabbi here in Albany. And he broke away from the Orthodox synagogue and started a Reformed synagogue in the late 1800s, or
It probably was the
mid-
late 1800s, because I think he's related to another famous rabbi named Wise,
Yeah.
who was
Okay.
a leader in the Reform
Right.
movement. Yes.
And then he was in Ohio, I believe. And
Yes.
then he got
Yeah.
word
Cincinnati.
that Ulysses S. Grant was kicking out the Jews from his little section in
He would not allow Jewish merchants.
right,
Mhm.
because he felt they were driving up the cost of cotton. So Wise and his other people went to Abraham Lincoln and sat with him in the White House and told him what Grant was doing, and he telegraphed a message that said, "You better stop this now." And he did, and the Jews were welcomed back to, I think it was Kentucky and Tennessee and
Ohio. Now, the interesting part, or one of the interesting parts of this interaction, is how many close friends and supporters Lincoln had who were Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we shouldn't continue this conversation for too long without
Right.
mentioning that there were Jews who served on both sides
Right.
during the Civil War, and Jews who fought and Jews who died.
and getting to present day, where we talk about the goings-on at the Capitol.
Hope there's no civil war there too over here.
this,
You never know sometimes.
There's an internal civil war.
Baruch Hashem, as we say.
But I wanted to ask you, because you chair the Ethics and Guidance Committee, and you're also on the Ethics
The
Panel.
co-chair of the New York State Legislative Ethics Commission.
Right. And you're
And
also
chair of the Assembly Ethics
Ethics
Committee.
and Guidance Committee, right. So that, I mean, I know that you can't reveal too much because it's a really secretive society that when you meet. But what can you tell us about what goes on in the Ethics Committee or in your role as co-chair, and just general terms? I mean, people might not understand a whole lot about it.
So essentially, we have three separate entities that interact, and this is in terms of the Assembly. The Senate is set up a little bit differently. So we have the actual Committee on Ethics in the Assembly, and our job is to handle any cases involving claims of sexual harassment, retaliation for sexual harassment, or discrimination. Now, in addition to that, there's a separate entity which is not part of the legislature. That's called the Joint Commission on Public Ethics, or JCOPE. JCOPE is, in essence, a prosecutorial entity, and they investigate any and every violation
Right, so
of
that's
state
separate and
laws.
apart. That's
separate.
more executive. than
Yes,
it
that's
is-
part of the executive branch with appointees from the governor and the Assembly and the Senate.
right.
Now, the third entity is the State Legislative Ethics Commission. So when JCOPE determines that someone has violated the laws, JCOPE, as a prosecutorial entity, cannot impose, so to speak, a sentence, an assessment, or a penalty. The case is then sent, the investigation is then sent to the Legislative Ethics Commission, and it's the Legislative Ethics Commission that determines, first, if it concurs with the findings of JCOPE, and secondly, what the penalty or assessment should be. Now, in addition to that, JCOPE's in charge of educating members of the legislature on, to make sure that they don't violate the laws,
Right.
and also in charge of reviewing our financial disclosure forms, which are fairly elaborate.
But the Assembly also educates their members on ethics and the potential violations and sexual harassment and all that.
It does, and it does so.
And the staff, too.
It does, yeah, and the staff, and it does so in conjunction with the Legislative Ethics Commission.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting and
So-
elaborate structure.
So just your responsibility with the Assembly, what can you tell us that goes on? And have you ever had anyone come up to you personally and say, here's a note, but I'm being harassed, or something to that effect? I mean,
Well, without going into any of the facts, those things do occur. And what we have been done, and what I'm very proud that we were able to do, and we did this last year, is we established a new system, very similar to what my friend Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is trying to accomplish with the United States military. In the military, if someone's the victim of sexual harassment, they are very hesitant to report up the chain of command because it's going to be very, very bad potentially for their careers. We had the same thing in the New York State Assembly. So last year, what we did was, and I was very proud to have been the chair of a task force that established the new policy. We have a new policy, and we have an independent investigator. So if anyone believes that they are the victim or the subject of any harassment, they can report this. They don't have to report it to me or the speaker or anybody else, although they can. But they can report this to our independent investigator, who is a world-renowned professor of law at CUNY Law School in New York City and was one of the leading champions for human rights in New York State and throughout the world.
His name being?
His name is Merrick T. Rick Rosaine.
Merrick, like Merrick, Long Island?
Precisely.
Oh, okay. And what was it?
Rosaine. Rossein.
Okay. And
so we have a good system to deal
that's
with.
the first time I've heard that name, so
Yes.
maybe I'm just out of the loop because this isn't my field of.
This is a fairly arcane area, and
But I never heard of this gentleman.
No,
So-
nor would you
Would
have.
you?
So
Okay.
don't feel bad.
He would be a good news reporter. He should over here. Don't give him
At
that.
least know
away.
at least-
He's a very good guy. He won't be offended.
Okay.
So we are very, very lucky to have this structure
Okay.
that makes it easier for people who are the victims to report without having the fear of
I
retribution.
want to ask you this, and it's because it was a tough year last year in the Assembly, but I wanted to ask you about this as an example, but not getting into the details that I don't think you can still, even though the
Oh,
even
you're
though
a
it's
good
over.
reporter. I'm sure
But
you'll
I'm
take
just-
me where you want me to go.
But I'm just asking about Micah Kellner. He was an assemblyman. He was stripped of all his staff. He was accused of hitting on men and women. And he was, that's what we've heard. I don't know for a fact because I haven't heard from someone, so I heard third hand. But, he was, and then he decided, again, eventually, not to run, or I don't think.
Precisely.
Okay, he wasn't defeated. He just thought.
He
better
decided
of
that
running.
I would imagine that discretion is the better part of
Valor, because
valor,
they took away-
which may be Talmudic in origin originally.
Because
I'm
they,
not sure.
they took away his staff eventually. They took away, and if he
Well, his staff was only taken away after a second incident.
right.
Yes.
He didn't learn his lesson. It was habitual, whatever. So I just wanted to ask you, when you have a fellow Jew and a fellow assemblyman, tell us your feelings. You have feelings. I know you do. So tell us your feelings about what goes through your heart and your mind when you have to deal with something like this.
Mark, a very interesting question. I'm not going to comment specifically on Kellner's case, although I can report to you that Kellner's second appeal was just denied. So he is done with his appeals process, and he got due process and then some in terms of the Assembly protecting his rights. The Assembly must as well protect the rights of its employees.
Right.
Now, so you ask how, as a fellow Jew or a fellow member of the Assembly, myself and other members of the
How do you
committee
feel?
well, this is how I feel. I was very fortunate as a youngster to have had in the little city of Marinette, Wisconsin, really in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
a wonderful rabbi, and his name is Leib Posner, and his brother Zalman recently passed away. These are very, very highly respected and loved rabbis.
Just wanted to interject. It was the biggest rabbis in the Chabad movement.
Precisely. And my rabbi, Yehuda Leib Posner, was one of the first students, yeshiva students, of the Rebbe in Brooklyn in 1940 or 41. So now how does it happen that of all the places for a phenomenal rabbi to be assigned, he ends up in Marinette, Wisconsin, a city of 11,000 people, with, at that point, maybe 24 Jewish families? Well, there had been a family in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that had a son, and they wanted this son bar mitzvahed. They communicated with the Rebbe. The Rebbe knew that Rabbi Posner was in California, and was coming back on the train from California to New York. So the Rebbe assigned Rabbi Posner to go to Iron Mountain, Michigan. You have not been, you may have been there because you're from Chicago,
Yeah,
but I'm not sure you've been there. Mark, I doubt you've ever been there. I've been there many times. And he prepared, Rabbi Posner prepared this youngster for his bar mitzvah. At the same time, my little town, which is maybe 140 miles away from Iron Mountain, needed a rabbi. And someone from my town had been at the bar mitzvah and asked Rabbi Posner, will he come to my little town?
Right.
Rabbi Posner communicated with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, by all means. So Rabbi Posner gave us a commitment for, I think it was 2 or 3 years, and he was my teacher.
Okay.
He not only taught me a little bit, the little I know about Hebrew or Jewish culture, because I did not grow up in an environment of Jewish culture, but he also taught us how to play baseball, and he was just a wonderful man. And he is still alive. He lives in Brooklyn, and he and I are still in touch. Oh. So I think the point
Did you call him for advice?
Is, I have spoken with him about serious things.
About the ethics of the legislature?
Not specifically about the ethics of the legislature, but about ethics in general, and about doing what he taught us, which is to do what's right. So my job is to do what's right. And whether it's someone who is Jewish that is involved, unfortunately, or whether it's someone who is any other faith, it's the same process.
Right, I understand.
And
but
this deals with the integrity of the government of the state of New York. I am also a parent, and I have a son who's been involved in government and politics, and my daughter for a while was involved in politics as well. And the idea that anyone in a position of power would use that position unfairly to manipulate young people is abhorrent to me, and I think I can thank my rabbi for teaching me that. And the idea is...
Pull your mic up a little. Yeah, that's good.
So the idea is that whether someone is of any faith or another, doesn't much matter. Our obligation as members of the government is to nurture and protect and mentor young people who work there.
This is the cold analysis that you're giving me.
Yes.
I'm asking you for your heart, for your pathos. What goes through your heart when do you shake your head and go, "Oy, this is not."
That has happened, Mark, many times.
You know.
Yes.
I mean, I just can't imagine how hard your hair must have been black when you first took over the Ethics Commission. I just can't imagine what goes through.
Not quite. So, look, we have to do what's right. And whether it's a member of the assembly who is taking advantage of young people, or it's a member of the clergy, or any other person, we have to do what's right. We have to protect the people, and that's the consideration that is of paramount importance. It's to do what's right. We have to be dispassionate. In order to be fair, we have to be dispassionate.
But you do have a heart, and you do have feelings.
Well,
everyone does.
Some people would debate whether I have a heart.
All right.
All right, but I really wanted to get to that point. But I think I think the fact that you do have that, you're very much into the law, and you look at, you're on the Codes Committee, the Judiciary Committee. You very much,
I've practiced law for many, many years.
Right, ethics, all of that goes into the practice of law. Were you a prosecutor at some point, or?
Not exactly. I was a criminal defense lawyer, but over the years I have gotten more convictions than most prosecutors would ever hope to have. I did that for a long time and handled difficult cases. Oh, by the way, just go back a little step about my Rabbi Posner.
Good.
So Rabbi Posner wore a black hat, he had a beard, and wore black clothing in a little town which was where the Jews were few and far between. We were the vestigial remnants of what had once been a large Jewish population at the turn of the previous century. That's the 1800s going into the 1900s, and he was very. It was very obvious, and obvious to anyone in the community, that This was someone very, very different. And that was a cause of some consternation for some members of the Jewish community. But in my house, we just thought that was great.
Okay.
Very good.
So what's going on in the Judiciary Committee that's hot? That's a hot topic.
Well, this year, what's going to occur is that because of the cloud that's hanging over the Senate, we very much doubt that there's going to be much movement towards the resolution of any of the major issues involving the judiciary or any of the other committees, because the Senate is going to, unfortunately, be recoiling from the cloud that's hanging over it. So,
And everyone on the Senate side that I spoke to said that's not, they're pushing aside because Scalos wasn't indicted. I mean, it was just he's some investigation. Some of the senators were subpoenaed, but they don't know, they don't have anything more than that, so they want to get on with the issues.
I know.
And hope the end of June comes more quickly.
but a good Talmudic analysis would tell us that, well, what else are they going to say?
Okay, so let me ask you quickly about the education investment tax credit, because that's one of the big issues that might come up before the end of the year. How do you feel about that? How do you stand on that? What's your position
Let
on
me ask
that?
you, Mark, we had people before us, we have so many assemblymen and senators, they were trying to push it into budget. Well, obviously the budget passed and it's not there. So it can be just the format.
Yes.
It can be passed without the budget.
It can be a freestanding bill. And it is a freestanding bill. So we will wait and we will see what happened. I am fairly agnostic
Why?
on this because at a time when we don't have enough money for education, to be able to have an investment tax credit which could net some people, forget deductions, it's not a deduction, it's a tax credit of many, many thousands of dollars. It might be a little too elaborate, and I've discussed this with some of the people who are pushing it.
So
I just don't know. And I would also like, but as I said, I could vote for it, I could vote against it.
Right.
I would like to see a few more protections
Like what?
for public education.
Like what?
Well, to make sure that at least a certain guaranteed percentage of whatever is not going to the state of New York goes to public education. Look, I understand the theory and I appreciate the theory that those who send their children to parochial schools, whether they're Jewish schools or Catholic schools, ought to be entitled to some assistance. And the state does assist to a certain extent. Over time, however, the state has not fully honored its obligation to pay the parochial schools for mandated services. I'm pleased to say the last couple of years that we've done a whole lot better in terms of doing that. So I understand the concern and I understand the friction. The philosophy of those who back the bill, however, is that this will be as good for public education as it will be for private education. And I don't tend to think that's necessarily correct, because the folks who've got the money to make these contributions with are not going to be contributing towards the schools in New York State that most need the financial assistance. And if I could figure out a way, and hint, hint, nod, nod, wink, wink, to make sure that there was some guarantee, I would look at this perhaps a little less agnostically.
Okay.
I know we're not supposed to be agnostic.
I
know.
More favorably.
I didn't say I look at this atheistically.
That's right. No, okay. No, but you're parav on it, as we say. You're
I'm
parav.
parav.
Okay.
All right, so maybe they could find ways to tweak, the bill to make it more accessible to the schools that need them.
It's a very interesting concept, and I think there's much to be said for it, but it still, in my opinion, needs some work. And we have to make sure that those schools in New York State which are most in distress get some assistance.
Have you been
and
lobbied
they are
on-
not
have you been
going
lobbied
to,
on this?
of course. So that, but we know intellectually, to be intellectually honest, no one's going to be making contributions to those schools that most need the financial help, the financial assistance. And if we could figure out some way to do that, then I'd be a whole lot more comfortable.
Okay.
And I've expressed that.
Interesting.
I've
It's a good
expressed that for a
point.
long
It's a
time.
So
good point.
let me ask you about the the bill about the Senate side. The Senate passed the EITC in January.
I think they did that the first day they were here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So are you, but they said now they're reworking it. Do you still have hope that because they want to have a compromise with the Assembly that they can have a same as bill? Do you have hope in, through discussions in conference or whatever, that there would be a compromise before the year is out?
Not only did Rabbi Posner teach me how to play baseball, he taught me
Not to predict the future.
always have hope.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we only have about 5 minutes left, and I really wanted to ask you about your other role as president of the National Association of Jewish Legislators of New York. And that's a group that is quite large in New York State legislature
I
because
believe we have probably more Jewish legislators than any other state. California may be close. They
Well,
may actually be a little bit ahead of us.
But not just that, you have two categories of members for the group. You have Jewish members and associate Jewish members, right?
Well, associate members.
Associate
Yes.
members, okay.
Yes.
So the associate members are non-Jews who have a Jewish footprint in their district.
Or they just want to be associated with the National Association.
Well, I did an analysis,
Mm-hmm.
and I found out that 96% of the state legislature is either Jewish or has a Jewish footprint. So if you have a meeting of the Jewish legislators, you will have basically a joint session of the legislature.
We probably would.
And you're going to
if
have
we-
4% upset because they don't have anyone in there.
Last month we had a public meeting with Amir Sagi,
Yes.
the Deputy General Counsel of the Israeli Consulate. And even though we were in the middle of budget time, and I'm sure we were in any number of crises, that was very, very well attended. And that's one of the things that we tried to do.
What was the major issue? Trade with Israel, or?
It was an update. The major issue was, and because this was right at about the time of the election, it was just after the election, the issue was the political landscape of Israel and the landscape in Israel in terms of how it's going to manage to get along with, if it can, with its Arab neighbors
Of the
and Persian neighbors.
Of the 150 members of the state assembly, 27, 6 Republicans and 21 Democrats have no Jewish footprint in their district.
When you say no Jewish footprint,
No
Mark, I'm
synagogue.
not sure
there's
I know what you mean.
There's no synagogue. There's no JCC. There's no Jewish organization. There's just, they might have a couple of Jews that travel to another synagogue in another district.
So these are folks who are probably from some of the more remote parts of
No.
New York State.
No, they're from people, and there are 3, 1 Republican senator and 2 Democrat senators that have no Jewish footprint.
This is like a statistical analysis of the
Yeah.
game
Well,
of baseball.
I
Are you going to
will-
tell me if they're
will tell
right-handed
you-
or left-handed?
I will tell you that
You're
there
going
are
to tell me how
people
often they daven?
in Brooklyn, Kimberly Jean-Pierre from Long Island, has no Jewish footprint that I could find.
But she's
in
from
her-
Suffolk County, so there's JCCs that are near
But
her
what
and
I'm saying
synagogues.
but she also represents New Montefiore Cemetery and Wellwood
You got a lot of
Cemetery.
dead Jews
So
over
she's
there.
so they
Now,
don't-
if we were in
they
Chicago,
vote over
if we
there?
were still in Chicago, my friend
Well,
Rabbi,
they
that would
vote
be, that
over
would still be
there.
the voting public.
That's right. And then like Phil Ramos from Suffolk has no Jewish footprint.
But you should hear him speak Yiddish.
I know. Well, I doubt it.
So that makes them half Jews over
And
there.
then-
That's,
But Vivian Cook, Jeff Aubrey from Queens, he's got no. He represents the Mets in Citi Field, but he's got no.
But Jeff has synagogues within a mile or two of his district. He's got synagogues in Forest Hills and on Queens Boulevard.
Right, but
So-
not in his district.
But I see the distinction
Okay.
that you're drawing.
Okay.
But I think it's
Well, you gotta-
important for us to realize or to acknowledge that New York State is very culturally Jewish,
But-
and even
right.
Jeff's district, which I know very well, while it may not have a synagogue or a
Right.
JCC, has Jews living in it.
That's right, who go
And-
to another assembly district to take advantage of the Jewish
Precisely.
culture. Okay, but you have to set the parameters somehow in some way.
I guess so.
Okay, so that's, I
You-
had to do
It's
something.
definitional.
to figure this
If
out.
there's one Jew living there, it's a Jewish district,
and it's
that's
not.
all.
And that's why I'm saying.
My family moved around a lot, so I lived in
got
places where there were no Jews.
Felix Ortiz, who represents like, a very Hispanic area in Brooklyn, has no,
What about Luis Sepulveda?
Oh, yeah. No, he's got nothing. I haven't found anyone.
All right, because his grandmother was Jewish.
Well, that could be,
It is.
but that's not, he's
Some
not.
Jew over here doesn't, mother's
But
mother,
he's
maybe.
not. And, Latrice Walker, Maritza Davila, Annette Robinson, Nick Perry in Brooklyn, even though he has parts of Canarsie, it's not the parts that are,
I get it.
okay.
I
So
get it. And what do we do with that? We
you're
have to
very
get more Jews
interesting-
to move into
but
their
you're-
districts.
But it's very interesting that you mention this because a lot of people would think that it's upstate, that is in the more rural areas that don't have the Jewish footprint. But the districts are larger upstate.
Yes,
So
they
you
are.
have more of an opportunity to find at least one synagogue in those assembly districts or one.
There is no
Jewish
such thing as one synagogue.
Well,
Every little town has two.
One we go
You
to,
know
one we
that.
don't go to. I understand. So you would, but there are fewer upstate that don't have a Jewish footprint than in the New York City area. And
right, well,
I'm
this is-
here happy to give you.
You know what I
this.
say about this?
Yeah.
Toda Rabbah for telling me.
Okay, and I wanted to let you know also that you see all these heritage days.
Yes.
But we don't have a Jewish Heritage Day to celebrate our culture, and with all these legislators and with all this culture in New York State, why don't we?
Well, we had Yom Yerushalayim several years ago.
But
We do celebrate holidays, and we celebrate holidays in the assembly.
I'm
But if
talking
you're
about
talking
in the
about
well of the legislature, where they have the Turkish Day, Taiwan Day, Canada Day. I mean, they have all these other heritage
we just
days.
had a Mirsagi in the well. We do this every year. Oh, and by the way, while you're on that subject, and this is a good segue, on May 5th at 1 o'clock in the Empire State Convention Center is going to be a very interesting ceremony involving the President of Albania, and it's going to commemorate the Albanian heroic effort in saving Jewish lives during the
that's
Second
very
World
interesting.
War.
I'll have to
And
go
that's
to
a
that.
good thing. Albania is a very,
May
very
5th, all right,
unique
so I'm gonna make
country.
it.
And
And he's coming to
at
Albany.
the end of
Albania to Albany.
at the end of the Second World War, Albania had more Jews than it did at the beginning
Right.
of the Second World War.
That's very
So we have a lot of events that we
Okay.
that we observe and celebrate
Okay.
About the
that
Jewish
do
people.
touch on our culture and
Okay.
our heritage.
Okay.
With that over here, we have to say goodbye, but listen, you say shalom, but shalom means goodbye, but all means hello, so you'll have to come up again, Chuck, and it's a real pleasure talking to you always.
The pleasure is mine, Rabbi.
Yes,
It's a
great.
joy to be here.
Much
Thank you, Mark.
success to you.
And we're gonna root for the Cubs this
Oy
year.
vey, they'll throw you out of New York
And
State
the
over
Mets,
here.
And the Mets as well.
All right.
Thank you.